Emperor Threnn had insisted on watching the live fire drill from 20 feet closer than his flightmaster recommended, and the backfire that followed cost him a strip of wing membrane the length of a man's arm. The garrison had been running fire lance exercises for a week. New Imperial ordnance, tested at the border where a failure would cost lives rather than reputation, and Threnn, who made a point of personally observing any weapon his soldiers would eventually carry into real danger, had planted himself at the drill line's edge in dragon form, close enough to read the lancer's form properly, over the flightmaster's repeated and increasingly urgent objections. The fourth lance misfired. Not catastrophically. No lancer was harmed. The fault traced afterward to a faulty seal, rather than any error in handling. But the backfire's flare caught the Emperor's left wing full across the membrane at exactly the angle his proximity had made possible. And Threnn, 300 years accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any given field, found himself instead burned, humiliated, and standing in front of 40 soldiers who had just watched their supposedly invulnerable emperor, injured by his own stubborn insistence on standing too close. "I am uninjured," he announced, in the flat tone of a man for whom the wing's screaming pain was considerably less urgent than the wound to his own pride, and turned to leave the drill field before the flightmaster could finish the sentence beginning, unmistakably, with the words, "Majesty." That membrane requires. He made it exactly to the garrison's outer gate, before the wing's damage made itself undeniable, buckling under him with a fresh wave of agony that even 300 years of discipline could not fully mask. The garrison commander, a sensible woman named Ferris who had served this border post for a decade and had learned, in that decade, exactly how much of an emperor's pride could survive being publicly wrong, offered immediately to send a rider for the nearest palace physicians. 3 days hard travel, but the Empire's finest burn specialists, entirely capable of treating a wing membrane injury properly. Threnn refused, with a firmness that brooked no further discussion. "I ignored my own flightmaster's direct advice, and stood 20 feet too close to a drill I had no operational need to observe from that distance," he said. "I have no intention of compounding that error by summoning the entire palace medical apparatus to document, in careful official detail, exactly how thoroughly my own stubbornness burned me. This garrison will have a local remedy for a burn of this size. Find it, Commander Ferris," recognizing an order that would not survive further argument, did the practical thing rather than the ceremonial one. "There is a weaver in the garrison town, Majesty, Marielle Fenn, runs her mother's loom-house alone since the old woman passed. Loom fires being what they are, she has treated more burns in that town than our own field medic has, and she asks no questions she is not owed answers to. I would trust her hands with this before I would trust most physicians I have served under. Send for her," Threnn said, and the wing's fresh agony, in that moment, mattered rather less to him than the relief of a solution that did not require explaining his own foolishness to the capital. Marielle Fenn had treated a great many burns in 25 years of running her mother's loom-house. Split knuckles from hot shuttle frames, scalded forearms from dye vats gone wrong. Once, memorably, a full sideburn from a loom fire that had nearly taken the whole workshop with it. She had never once treated anything on the scale of what the garrison guards described, breathless, at her workshop door. "It is the Emperor," the younger of the two guards said, in the particular hushed urgency of someone still processing the sentence himself. "Wing burn, from the drill field. He will not send for the palace physicians, and Commander Ferris says you are the surest hand in town, with burns of any size." Marielle gathered her kit without much ceremony. Clean cloth, her strongest salve, the calm competence of a woman who had learned long ago that panic served no burn victim, human or otherwise, and walked to the garrison grounds, with the guards flanking her like an honor escort. Neither of them quite knew how to perform properly. She found Threnn in dragon form in the garrison's central yard, the left wing held at an angle that told her, before she was within 20 feet of him, exactly how much pain he was disguising with sheer stubborn posture. The burn itself, when she finally examined it properly, was worse than the guard's breathless description had prepared her for. A long strip of membrane blistered and raw, the kind of injury that would leave permanent scarring if not treated with real care in the first hours. This needs cleaning, salve, and a proper wrap before the membrane starts to stiffen wrong, she said, already opening her kit, addressing the massive, ancient creature in front of her, with the same brisk, unimpressed practicality she gave every burn patient who walked through her workshop door. It is going to hurt considerably more before it hurts less, Majesty. I apologize in advance for that, and I am doing it anyway. The guards who had escorted her exchanged a look at the flatness of her address, unused to hearing anyone speak to the Emperor with quite so little ceremony, but Threnn himself made no objection at all, and Marielle, cleaning the burn with the same steady hands she had used on every loom fire injury of her adult life, did not notice the exchange, focused entirely on the work in front of her, the way she was always focused entirely on the work in front of her. The cleaning and salving went as such things always went, necessary, painful, endured by a patient too proud to make a sound louder than the occasional sharp intake of breath through gritted teeth. It was the wrapping that presented the actual problem. Marielle's kit carried cloth enough for burns of ordinary size. What Threnn's wing required was something considerably longer, finer, and more flexible than anything she had brought, a wrap that could hold the membrane's edges together without restricting the careful, minimal movement the healing process would still require, made of fabric fine enough not to catch or snag against 300 years of scale. She looked at her kit's ordinary cloth, calculated its insufficiency in the space of a breath, and reached instead for the one piece of fabric on her own person that met every requirement the wound actually demanded. The scarf at her neck, fine woven on her own mother's loom, long enough to wrap the whole burn's considerable length, soft enough not to irritate healing membrane. She did not hesitate over the decision the way a lesser weaver might have. A scarf, however finely made, mattered considerably less to Marielle than a wound treated properly, and she unwound it from her neck and began winding it instead around the burned wing with the same unhurried, competent care she gave every proper bandage. "This is my own work," she said, by way of explanation, when the great eye turned to watch what she was doing with evident surprise. "Finest weave I own, as it happens, which makes it the correct choice for a wound this size regardless of what it costs me to give it up. I do not treat burns with whatever is convenient, Majesty. I treat them with whatever actually serves the wound." Threnn, watching a weaver wrap his most humiliating injury in the finest thing she owned without a flicker of resentment at the cost, found himself experiencing an emotion he could not immediately name, though he would come, in the weeks that followed, to recognize it as the specific gratitude reserved for care that asks nothing of your dignity in return for its giving. She returned the next evening to check the wrap's progress, as she had promised, and found him in the same central yard, wing held carefully still, weathering an evening wind that had turned sharp and cold with the season's first real bite. "That wind is not good for healing membrane," she observed, kneeling to examine the scarf's wrap, satisfied to find it holding clean. "Cold slows the mending. You should be somewhere sheltered, Majesty, not standing exposed in a yard built for drilling soldiers rather than nursing wounds." She did not expect what happened next. As she knelt close to the wing, working carefully at the wrap's edge to check the healing beneath, Threnn shifted his whole massive body, angling the uninjured wing outward in a slow, deliberate arc that placed its bulk directly between Marielle and the cutting wind, not protecting the burned wing, which remained exactly where it had been, but protecting her, specifically, from a cold she had mentioned only in passing, as an observation about his own healing, rather than a complaint about her own comfort. She noticed it, filed it as an interesting instinct, and did not remark on it, because she had not yet understood it as anything more than a large creature's incidental movement. It was only on her third visit, when the same shielding motion repeated itself the instant a gust picked up while she worked, that she began to understand it was not incidental at all. "You keep doing that," she said, the third time, pausing her work on the wrap to look at him properly. "Blocking the wind, every time it picks up while I am working. That is not accidental, is it?" The great eye held hers for a long moment, and said, without words, everything Threnn had not yet found the language to say aloud. "I want to tell you what that shielding motion actually cost him, because Marielle, focused on the wrap, did not immediately grasp the full price of what she was witnessing. Moving the uninjured wing to that angle was not, in itself, a demanding motion for a healthy dragon. But Threnn's whole body, 300 years accustomed to balancing its considerable weight across two functioning wings, had spent a week and a half compensating for the burned one's enforced stillness. Every posture, every shift of balance, quietly renegotiated around the injury's limitations. Angling the good wing outward to block wind he judged uncomfortable for her meant further compensating an already compensating frame. A small strain layered onto a larger one, chosen and repeated, evening after evening, entirely without her asking for it. She learned this only when Commander Ferris, observing one such evening's treatment from a respectful distance, remarked on it afterward, with the particular dry insight of a soldier who had spent a decade reading dragons' body language. "He is off balance every time he does that for you," Ferris told her. "Costs him something in the already strained frame. Majesty being too proud to admit it costs him anything at all. I have watched him wince through it twice now, when he thought no one was looking closely enough to notice." Marielle turned this information over with the same careful attention she gave a difficult weave. "He is worsening his own healing to keep wind off me," she said slowly, and saying nothing about it. "That would be my read as well," Ferris said. "For what little my read is worth on matters of the heart, which I confess is not my area of particular expertise." She raised it with him directly at the next evening's treatment, unwilling to let a kindness costing him actual healing time continue unacknowledged. "You are straining your own recovery every time you block that wind for me," she said. "Commander Ferris tells me you wince through it when you think no one is watching. I would ask you to stop, Majesty. My comfort is not worth slowing your own mending." Threnn was quiet a long moment, and when he answered, his voice carried a rawness that had nothing to do with the burn's physical pain. "I have spent 300 years being protected by everyone around me," he said. "Guards, physicians, an entire flight trained to shield me from every conceivable harm. You are the first person in 3 centuries to shield something of mine without being asked, without being paid, without it being any part of your assigned duty at all. I find the small cost of returning that instinct, however it strains an already strained wing, matters to me a great deal more than the speed of my own recovery." It did not take the garrison long to notice what had become, over the following weeks, an unmistakable pattern. Every evening, at the hour Marielle Fenn walked from her loom-house to check the wing's progress, Threnn positioned himself, without fail, in whatever part of the garrison grounds offered the best natural windbreak, and supplemented whatever shelter the terrain provided, with his own body's careful angling the moment she arrived. Commander Ferris, who prided herself on missing very little that happened under her command, remarked on it to her second-in-command, with the particular satisfaction of a career soldier who has watched enough court gossip travel through her garrison to recognize the genuine article when it finally appeared in front of her. The younger soldiers, less discreet than their commander, took to placing modest wagers on how many weeks would pass before the Emperor said something plainly, rather than simply rearranging his own considerable bulk every evening to keep a weaver's daughter out of the wind. Marielle, for her part, noticed the garrison's growing attention with the same flat, unbothered practicality she brought to everything, and continued her evening visits exactly as she always had, checking the wrap, adjusting the salve, offering the same brisk, unceremonious care she gave any patient, human or otherwise, regardless of how many soldiers had begun finding excuses to be present at that particular hour. "They are placing wagers on us, you know," she told Threnn, on an evening when the garrison's attempt at subtlety had grown particularly thin. "I overheard 2 of your soldiers debating the odds outside my workshop this morning." "I am aware," Threnn said, with the specific weary dignity of a man who commanded an empire and could not, apparently, command his own garrison's gossip. "I have found myself, against considerable inclination, unable to summon much genuine objection to the speculation." She asked him, eventually, on an evening when the wing had healed enough to bear the question without disrupting the treatment, why exactly a man willing to fly directly into a burning drill field had been so unwilling to simply summon the palace's finest physicians for the resulting injury. Pride, in the small accounting of it, Threnn admitted. I made an error any competent commander would have avoided, and I did not wish the entire Palace Medical Corps documenting, in careful clinical detail, exactly how thoroughly my own stubbornness had burned me. That was the reason I gave Commander Ferris, and it was true, as far as it went. And in the larger accounting? Marielle asked, sensing, correctly, that the small reason was not the whole of it. He was quiet a moment, working out how to say the rest of it plainly. In the larger accounting, he said, I have spent 300 years surrounded by physicians whose care, however skilled, is always transactional. A duty performed, a service rendered, a report filed for the palace's records. I did not want that for this particular wound. I wanted, though I did not have the language for it at the time I refused Ferris's offer, to be tended by someone who would simply treat the burn because it needed treating, without the whole apparatus of court medicine turning my own foolishness into an official incident. I did not know, when I gave that order, that the someone Ferris would find was you. I am considerably more grateful for the coincidence than I have any dignified way of expressing. I did not treat you differently than I treat anyone who walks through my door burned, Marielle said. I would ask you not to mistake ordinary competence for something rarer than it actually is. I have had a great deal of exposure to extraordinary competence delivered with considerable ceremony, Threnn said. I had very little exposure, before this month, to ordinary competence delivered with none at all. I find the second considerably rarer than the first, whatever modesty you would prefer to assign it. Let me tell you about one particular evening in the middle of that healing month, because it explains something about Marielle that the garrison's fireside version of the story tends to smooth over in favor of the more romantic beats. Her mother's loom-house had never been a wealthy establishment, and the season of the Emperor's convalescence coincided, as such things do, with a stretch of hard weeks for the town's ordinary trade, 2 large commissions fallen through, a wool shipment delayed past any useful season, the loom-house's accounts drifting closer to trouble than Marielle liked to admit even to herself. She said nothing of this to anyone at the garrison, because it was not the garrison's business, and because 25 years of running her mother's establishment alone had taught her that complaining about thin accounts rarely thickened them. Threnn noticed anyway. Not through anything she said, but through the small, accumulating details a careful observer collects without meaning to. The same worn dress worn 3 evenings running, the particular tightness in her shoulders that hard arithmetic tends to produce, the way she counted her remaining salve stores with more attention than the treatment strictly required. He did not offer coin outright. He understood, by then, enough of her character to know that a direct gift would offend the same plain pride that had made her give up her own scarf without a second thought. Instead, on the pretense of the wing requiring a specific weave of cloth for its final stage of healing, a claim with just enough medical plausibility that she did not immediately question it, he commissioned, through Commander Ferris, a full order of fine wrapping cloth from Marielle's own loom-house, priced generously and paid promptly, ostensibly for the garrison's ordinary medical stores. That is considerably more cloth than any wing requires, Marielle observed, when the commission's scope became clear, studying the order with the flat, assessing look of a woman who suspected, correctly, that she was being managed. The garrison's medical stores are chronically under-provisioned, Threnn said, with a straight face that did not entirely survive her look. Commander Ferris will confirm it, if pressed. Commander Ferris, Marielle said, will confirm whatever you instruct her to confirm, Majesty, and we both know it. He did not deny it. I am aware you would refuse coin offered plainly, he said instead, honest now that the pretense had failed to hold. I am considerably less willing to watch you count salve stores with that particular worry in your shoulders, while saying nothing of it. If commissioning cloth I do not strictly need is the only currency you will accept, then I will commission cloth, and you may consider the matter closed. Marielle was quiet a long moment, turning the gesture over the way she turned over a difficult weave. That is a great deal of trouble to go to, she said finally. For a debt you have already more than repaid, with a wing that shields me from every wind that has blown through this garrison in a month. It was never a debt, Threnn said. I would ask you to stop accounting for it as one. It was only ever the same thing you gave me, offered back in whatever currency you would actually accept. Care. Given because it was needed, without ceremony, and without expectation of anything further in return. She accepted the commission, in the end, because refusing it outright would have cost more pride than accepting it did, and because the loom-house's accounts, thickened by an emperor's generous and thoroughly unnecessary order, carried the establishment through the season's hard weeks without her ever having to admit to anyone, including herself, exactly how close to trouble they had actually come. The wing healed clean by the season's turn, the scarf's fine weave having done its work as well as any palace physician's finest bandage could have, and Threnn kept the scarf itself afterward, washed and folded and placed in the one drawer of his private quarters that held nothing else, a fact he did not mention to Marielle, and that she discovered entirely by accident, months later, when a visit to the capital brought her briefly into rooms she had never expected to see. "You kept it," she said, finding the scarf exactly where 300 years of a more careful man might have stored something considerably more valuable, and finding it treated with precisely that level of care regardless. "I kept it," Threnn agreed, without embarrassment. "It is the finest thing anyone has given me without calculation, in 3 centuries of rule, majesty, or otherwise. I did not think it deserved to go back to ordinary use once its purpose was served, however practical you would insist that purpose to have been." The wind-shielding instinct that had begun on the garrison grounds never fully left him, even once the wing's healing made the gesture medically unnecessary. Marielle found, in the months and then years that followed, that she genuinely could not recall the last time weather had reached her directly in his presence. A habit so thoroughly ingrained by then that neither of them fully registered it as remarkable anymore, the way you stop noticing a floor is level once you have walked it long enough. "You still do it," she observed once, years married by then, watching him angle his body against a sharp autumn wind on the same garrison grounds where the habit had first begun. "The wing has been whole for years. There is no medical reason left for it at all." "There was never only a medical reason," Threnn said. "There was a woman who gave me the finest thing she owned to treat a wound I had no right to be proud enough to hide, and who has never once, in all the years since, asked me for anything in return for the giving. I find I have very little else to offer that particular debt, except making certain the wind never touches her again, for as long as I have wings capable of stopping it." Marielle laughed at that, the same easy, unceremonious laugh she had given him on the drill field the first afternoon they met. "You make it sound considerably grander than it was, Majesty. I gave you a scarf because you were bleeding and cold and too proud to admit either. I did not weigh 3 centuries of debt before doing it. I only weighed the burn in front of me, and the cloth in my basket, and found the arithmetic simple enough not to require any further consideration." "That is precisely why the debt matters as much as it does," Threnn said. "You did not calculate my worth before deciding to help me. You have never once calculated anyone's worth before helping them, in all the years I have watched you run that loom house. I have spent 3 centuries surrounded by people who calculate first and act second. I find I would rather spend whatever remains of my reign near the one person I have ever met who does it the other way around." Commander Ferris, retiring from active garrison duty some years later, was asked by a younger officer, curious about the old stories, whether the tale of the Emperor's burned wing and the weaver's scarf had really happened exactly as the garrison's fireside tellings claimed. "More or less," Ferris said, with the dry satisfaction of someone who had watched the whole thing unfold in real time and had placed, discreetly, a small wager of her own on the eventual outcome. "Though I will tell you the part the fireside versions tend to leave out, because it is the part that actually mattered. It was never really about the scarf. Anyone with fine cloth and a steady hand could have wrapped that wound. It was that she wrapped it the same way she would have wrapped anyone's. No ceremony, no fuss, no awareness at all that she was tending an emperor, rather than an ordinary burn patient. He had 300 years of people treating him like an emperor by then. What he needed was someone to treat him like a burn." Marielle, when asked much the same question by her own daughter years later, gave an answer considerably plainer than the garrison's fireside version, in keeping with the whole of her character. Mother Teresa said that not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love, she told her daughter, working a length of fine cloth on the same loom her own mother had left her. I did not do anything great, treating that wing. I cleaned a burn and wrapped it in the best cloth I had on hand, the same as I would have done for the poorest farmer's child in this town. The greatness, such as it was never in what I did. It was only ever in doing it exactly the same way I did everything else, without ceremony, and without once asking what the doing might be worth to me. She married him in the spring, following the wing's full healing, at the garrison grounds themselves, at her own insistence, because some debts, she told the assembled court scribes who found the choice of venue curious, deserved to be honored exactly where they were first incurred, rather than dressed up in a capital's finer ceremony. The scarf, restored to ordinary use at last after years folded carefully in a drawer, served as the wedding's single unconventional touch, worn, at Threnn's quiet insistence, around his own wrist through the whole ceremony, in place of any more traditional ornament, because some fabric, he had come to believe, carried more weight than any crown jewel the treasury could have offered instead. The loom-house did not close when Marielle moved, eventually, and only partially, into the wider orbit of imperial life. She kept it running under her own supervision, training a young apprentice from the garrison town to eventually take over the ordinary trade, and she continued, for the rest of her life, treating burns for anyone who walked through the workshop door, emperor's wife or not, with exactly the same unceremonious competence she had always given the work. The palace physicians, initially skeptical of an empress who insisted on keeping a trade rather than retiring fully into court life, came in time to send her their most difficult burn cases, having learned, the way Commander Ferris had learned it years before them, that ordinary competence delivered without ceremony was very often the rarer and more valuable thing. Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. Marielle Fenn had spent 25 years treating burns with exactly that unremarkable, unceremonious care, never once expecting the small thing to matter beyond the wound it mended. It took one emperor's stubborn pride, one drill field's careless backfire, and one scarf given without hesitation to teach her that small things, done with enough love and repeated enough evenings running, have a way of becoming considerably larger than anyone giving them ever intended. The garrison, for its part, never quite let go of its fondness for the story, and the wagers the younger soldiers had once placed on how many weeks it would take the emperor to say something plainly, became, in time, a running joke revived at every wedding anniversary the garrison was fortunate enough to host. Commander Ferris, long retired but never quite willing to miss the occasion, made a point of attending every one of them, and never once let anyone forget that she had called the outcome correctly from the very first evening she watched an emperor rearrange 300 years of careful dignity for the sake of a weaver's comfort in the wind.